Mrs. Phan was resting on the old wooden daybed outside the front room. One hand held a large flapping palm leaf fan, while the other cradled a warm, fragrant cup of hot tea. Sweat trickled down her face as her clear eyes gazed out at the azure sky. The dazzling sunbeams pierced through, illuminating the courtyard and making the chrysanthemum bushes glow a brilliant yellow. Suddenly, a man rushed in, his demeanor frantic. He looked at Mrs. Phan and spoke with an urgent tone. "Mrs. Phan, my wife is having severe stomach pains. Please, come quickly to help us." Mrs. Phan swiftly put her teacup down on the table, then looked up at the man, speaking slowly. "Hey, is that right? Your wife is going into labor early? Let me just get my things from inside." I nodded vigorously, his face still flushed from walking a long distance under the scorching sun. Mrs. Phan, a petite woman with a slightly hunched back but still quick and nimble, emerged from inside with a fabric bag filled with her tools. She looked at Hai and said, "Done. Let's go." The rural road, desolate under the midday sun, offered no means of transport other than boats, but the water levels were low at this time. So the two had no choice but to walk, arriving in the early afternoon. As they approached the house, they could already hear the soft moans of the pregnant woman. I, filled with anxiety, rushed inside immediately. He found his wife, Grace, lying on a wooden bed, clearly in excruciating pain. Sweat soaked her entire body. Her face was contorted in a grimace, and her teeth were clenched tightly together. Yet she couldn't suppress the sounds of her agony, despite trying to hold them back. "Hey, go boil some water for me and get a clean towel," Mrs. Phan instructed as she entered. Though extremely worried about his wife, Hai promptly ran off to prepare everything Mrs. Phan requested. After that, he sent him outside, leaving only herself with Grace. Time crawled by. Alex paced back and forth outside, his heart churning with anxiety. It wasn't his own pain, yet he felt a sharp ache in his chest. Then a loud thud, like something heavy falling, echoed from inside, shattering the silence. It was followed by Mrs. Phan's voice. "It's done. Come in." Alex pushed the door open instantly. Mrs. Phan walked out, cradling a newborn baby boy in her arms, still red and tender. She handed the baby to him with a smile. "Congratulations! It's a boy!" Alex unconsciously burst into tears, perhaps overcome with joy, unable to control his emotions. Mrs. Phan continued, "It's all over now. You need to let her rest for a bit. She's a first-time mother, so she's weak, but she'll be fine. Remember to prepare some soft, milk-inducing foods for her. Well, I should head back now, before it gets dark, and the road becomes difficult." Alex nodded profusely, thanking her repeatedly. He didn't forget to discreetly slip a few banknotes into Mrs. Phan's bag as payment. Mrs. Phan happily accepted them, as midwifery had been her lifelong profession. In this small village, she was the only skilled midwife. Everyone in the village placed their trust in Mrs. Phan, with over 40 years of experience. She had even studied traditional medicine when she was a young woman, continuing until she was a woman in her 50s with a loving family of her own. The country road in the evening breeze, bathed in the lingering afterglow of sunset, painted the distant treetops a fiery red. The silhouette of the small woman was etched against the dusty path, which stretched high along the riverbank, as the last rays of sunlight gradually faded. Let's talk about the village of Lai, a small, peaceful place year-round, inhabited by simple folk. They lived together with deep affection, displaying the genuine sincerity of a riverside community. Gentle and kind, that was their nature from time immemorial. They were accustomed to the vast rice fields, the calm and peaceful night market, and the bamboo groves that rustled each morning with the early crow of roosters. Mrs. Chan. Mrs. Lai's family was considered quite prosperous in the village. Their garden stretched as far as the eye could see, bringing abundant harvests year after year, filling their granaries to the brim. She had only one son who had married a few years ago. From the outside, they appeared to be a rather harmonious family, but only those within truly understood and experienced the ingrained mindset of looking down on the poor, a lingering prejudice in Mrs. Lai's thinking. One afternoon, in their spacious three-room house, Mrs. Lai's sharp voice rang out, accustomed to being heard. "Grace, get out here. I have something to tell you." Grace, Mrs. Lai's daughter-in-law, came from a rather humble background and was an orphan, which had shaped her into a gentle, enduring person from a young age. She hurried up from the kitchen, her face still smudged with soot and damp with sweat, and quickly spoke. "Did you call me, Mother? Go paddle your boat to the river and gather some duckweed for the pigs to eat. Feeding them pig slop all the time is too expensive." Grace looked at the river, which was now swelling with large, swirling currents not suitable for going out. "But I'm cooking dinner. I haven't finished yet, Mother. Leave it. No one in this house eats early. Your husband will be in the fields until late. Hurry and get the duckweed before the water gets too high and you can't gather any. If the pigs starve, you'll go without dinner too." Grace quickly nodded in obedience. She rushed back to the kitchen to turn off the stove, then hurried out to the riverbank to paddle her boat and gather duckweed. It wasn't until late evening that Grace returned. But before she could rest, her empty stomach was met with Alex grabbing her hair and slapping her across the face. He glared and yelled, "Where have you been?" "Not doing any work. I'm tired from working in the fields and this cold water. How am I supposed to shower? It's almost dark, and you're still out probably messing around, huh?" Grace, who hadn't eaten, reeled from the painful slap, but still tried to endure it. She covered her face and stammered, "Mother asked me to go get duckweed, husband. I told Mother I'd finish cooking dinner first, but she said to go immediately, fearing the water would get too hot." Alex's facial muscles relaxed slightly, but his attitude remained irritable. He looked at Grace and grumbled, "Couldn't you have come back earlier? What were you doing out there until now? Don't we have pig slop at home that you had to go gather duckweed because Mother told me to? You dare to use Mother as an excuse. Do you like to argue?" Alex raised his hand to slap Grace again when Mrs. Lai unexpectedly came downstairs and cleared her throat, speaking up. "All right, let me talk to her. And you?" Mrs. Lai turned to Grace, her voice annoyed. "I told you to gather duckweed, not go sleep with someone by the river. You need to be quick with everything. Your husband comes home tired and hungry from the fields, and you intentionally stay out until dusk, didn't you?" Grace bowed her head in silence, suppressing her indignation, not daring to utter a single word in protest. It was clear that Mrs. Lai knew full well that the river water receded quickly in the evening, making it difficult to paddle the boat. And with dozens of pigs in the sty, how could gathering just a few bushes of duckweed be enough? Mrs. Lai let out a long sigh, then continued, "All right. Go finish cooking dinner, so your husband doesn't get hungry and angry. I won't be able to calm him down. Then take care of the duckweed and pig slop for the pigs to eat. If you can't even handle these simple tasks, what kind of wife and daughter-in-law are you? Always lazy and stupid." Grace bowed her head and softly said, "Yes," then went to the kitchen to light the fire. Her entire body was soaked, and she hadn't even had time to change her clothes. But by the time she finished all her chores, the dinner table only held scattered fish bones and a few limp, crushed vegetables. The rice pot had only a few grains clinging to its sides, and the chopsticks lay haphazardly. Grace stood silently, tears welling up in her eyes. This wasn't the first time she had been treated this way, and perhaps human endurance always has its limits. At some point, when that limit is reached, it will inevitably break. The unfair life of this unfortunate woman continued in the very house that everyone considered an exemplary family, until Grace announced she was pregnant. Mrs. Lai began to show joy. However, in stark contrast to Mrs. Lai, Alex seemed increasingly unwilling to welcome the child, even though it was his own. Mrs. Lai didn't care. As long as she had a grandchild to hold, she was content. She allowed Grace more rest than before, even going to the market to buy meat and fish specifically to nourish her daughter-in-law. For the first time, Grace felt a flicker of happiness and gratitude at being treated like a human being. But she still didn't dare neglect her chores, toiling from morning till night with countless trivial tasks. The only difference was that for heavy work, Mrs. Lee would hire someone, easing Grace's burden a little. Yet, a deep sadness lingered in her heart because Alex still showed no interest, even though the child in her womb was his. Time slowly passed. Grace's belly grew larger, but Alex's disposition remained unchanged. Until one day, Alex brought a woman home while Grace had gone to the market early. Mrs. Lee frowned at her son and sharply asked, "Who is this?" "This is Rose, my wife, mother." "What are you talking about? What are you talking? What wife? You already have a wife, Grace. When did I ever arrange for you to marry someone else without me knowing? Mother, you know I've been tired of Grace for a long time. This woman, Rose, is also pregnant with my child. I want to bring her home, so we need to figure something out." Mrs. Lai's face turned pale. She used her hands to steady herself, trying to control her anger. After a moment, she looked up at Alex and said slowly, "Take her away immediately, before Grace comes back and things get complicated." "What's there to be afraid of, Mother? I'm going to divorce her anyway." "She's pregnant. What are you talking about divorcing? Are you crazy? But Rose is also pregnant. She's also your grandchild." Although Mrs. Lee genuinely didn't like Grace, she couldn't simply say divorce and be done with it. Besides, Grace was pregnant with her first grandson. Mrs. Lee glared at Alex then. "It's your fault. Back then, I didn't approve of her, but you insisted on marrying her. That kind of person without a father or mother. Poor. You married her. And now what? If you want to marry someone else, you have to get rid of her first. It's not right to bring a pregnant woman home like this. What will the neighbors say? It'll ruin our family's reputation. Alex, due to his youthful nature, didn't think deeply. Now, hearing Mrs. Lai's words, he frowned, considering the implications. It's been a long time. What should we do now, Mother? Mrs. Lai sighed heavily, but looked at the girl Alex brought home, who was indeed beautiful and graceful. Alex said she was the daughter of a shop owner in the provincial town. Mrs. Lai nodded, appearing satisfied, then said slowly, "All right. Take the girl home for now. I'll figure out the rest later. Things need to be resolved smoothly. You can't just do whatever you want. Go, before Grace comes back and makes things even more difficult." Alex obediently agreed and quickly led Rose out before she bowed respectfully and greeted Mrs. Lai. Just then, Grace also returned from the market. She vaguely saw two figures leaving and asked Mrs. Lai, who waved her hand dismissively, "It's just that Alex, I was giving him some rice seeds, nothing else." "So, what took you so long at the market?" "I bought some striped catfish to make sour soup, Mother. Alex really likes this dish. And I also have some fried shrimp with chives. It goes great with sour soup. It's very appetizing." Mrs. Lai glanced at the fish in the pot and then said, "All right, go cook dinner and then clean the pigsty. Don't think that just because you're pregnant, you can become lazy. This family doesn't keep anyone who just eats without working." Grace bowed her head, though a little confused by her mother-in-law's attitude. She didn't dare say anything. She just thought that perhaps she had done something wrong, or her husband was in a bad mood. Which was Mrs. Lai was speaking like that. A few days later, Mrs. Lai went to the market and bought a large pig's trotter for Grace, telling her to stew it with bamboo shoots to nourish the baby. Grace began to feel happy, sensing her mother-in-law's special concern. She sat by the stove, watching the simmering pot, and began to dream of a better life in the future. Although Alex's temperament was still difficult, Grace believed that once the child was born, he would surely change. Grace still clearly remembered how, when Alex courted her, he had promised many things. But only a few years had passed. How could a person's heart forget so quickly? Mrs. Lai suddenly came downstairs, looked at Grace, and then said, "Grace, go to the back garden and get some Eclipta prostrata for me to make medicine. Can you do that later, Mother? I'm cooking soup." "Just go. I'll take care of it." Grace bowed her head and slowly stood up, cradling her heavy belly, nearing her due date, and walked to the back garden. Mrs. Lai, watching her daughter-in-law disappear into the garden from the kitchen, quickly walked to the simmering pot. She took a small paper packet from her pocket and immediately emptied its contents into the soup, carefully stirring it. Soon after, Grace, for some unknown reason, began to experience sudden stomach pains shortly after finishing her meal. She lay writhing in her room alone, while Alex was nowhere to be found. Grace tried to push herself up, crawling out to find her mother-in-law, but couldn't find her. Overwhelmed, Grace collapsed onto the cold tile floor, clutching her stomach in agony and bursting into tears. Sweat drenched her contorted face. Blood streamed from her lower body, staining the entire floor. until Grace vaguely heard her mother-in-law, Mrs. Lai, sitting beside her, shaking and calling her name. Grace struggled to whisper, with a faint, weak breath, "Mother. I'm in so much pain, Mother. What's wrong with me?" Grace only heard that much before she lost consciousness and was aware of nothing more. The villagers heard the news that Grace had slipped and fallen, causing a miscarriage. Unfortunately, due to her weakened health, she passed away. Everyone was saddened by the untimely death of the gentle girl, especially since Grace was pregnant and close to her due date. Mrs. Lai and Alex took turns crying, but only the two of them knew whether their tears were genuine or just an act. Meanwhile, Mrs. Phan was having dinner with her son, Ben, and his wife, Amy. Mrs. Phan sighed and said, "Poor girl, gone so young, and she hadn't even given birth yet." Ben had met Grace a few times. He said, "It's really a shame for her. So young, in her early 20s, and already gone." "Did you go to the funeral, Mother?" "No, I heard she was already buried. Buried so quickly, Mother. Don't you know? People say Mrs. Lai has a clashing fate with Grace, so she had to be buried early. Besides, the girl was an orphan. Had no relatives. So why wait around?" Amy nodded. She too had met Grace a few times. Although it was just superficial contact due to being neighbors, not close friends, Amy still felt pity for Grace's fate. Amy was also a woman who was a daughter-in-law, but perhaps she was luckier than Grace because her husband's family loved her dearly. The only thing was that Amy couldn't have children. She didn't know why, but despite being married for nearly 5 years, her womb remained empty. She knew her mother-in-law and husband loved her very much, but sometimes she still felt a pang of sadness because, as a woman, not being able to have children made her feel useless. That night, Mrs. Phan was half asleep in the front room when she faintly heard someone calling her name. The voice was both near and far, shrill, as if echoing from another realm. "Mrs. Phan, I'm in so much pain, Mrs. Phan." Mrs. Phan drowsily opened her eyes. "Who's calling? I'm in so much pain. Please help me, I'm about to give birth." Mrs. Phan now heard clearly, and she was wide awake. She quickly got out of bed, grabbed her midwifery bag, still trying to be quiet so as not to wake Ben and Amy. She walked out into the yard, but saw no one. She hastily looked around. Then in the distance, behind a bougainvillea bush, she thought she saw a faint shadow. Mrs. Phan squinted, took a few steps closer, and asked, "Who's there? Is someone in labor? Why are you out here?" The voice spoke again, faint, amid the chirping of insects. "Please, come help me deliver." As soon as she finished speaking, the shadow moved towards the dark, muddy country road. Mrs. Phan frowned and muttered to herself, "Who is that?" Asking for help with childbirth, but not waiting around. Indeed, despite feeling a bit annoyed, she quickly followed. Normally, if she had to go out at night like this, Mrs. Phan would ask Ben to accompany her. But tonight, he was tired from working in the fields, so she didn't want to disturb her son's sleep. The shadow continued to glide along the desolate path. Mrs. Phan strained her eyes, but still couldn't make out the person's face. She didn't know who it was from the village, but this profession of midwifery was like a sacred mission. If she wasn't quick, the pregnant woman could suffer greatly. So Mrs. Phan never dared to delay in any situation or circumstance. Even day or night, she always tried to be there on time. "Hey, slow down. Why are you rushing like that? Wait for me," Mrs. Phan called out, but the shadow still moved very quickly, its vague form light as the wind. The silent night road now echoed with the incessant chirping of insects hidden somewhere in the soft grass. Large gusts of wind whistled through the tree leaves, rustling above her head. Mrs. Phan continued to walk with difficulty until the shadow finally stopped in front, then turned into a narrow, desolate field. In her years of practice, Mrs. Phan had experienced many cases of childbirth in remote, isolated areas like this, so she continued to follow the shadow. But in the middle of the night, it was quite cold. She walked and complained under her breath, "It's so late, and it's cold. Ben should have come with me. Who is this, familiar or a stranger, calling for a midwife and then running off like a thief?" Finally, the shadow stopped at the base of a betel nut tree, as if intentionally waiting for Mrs. Phan to catch up. She arrived, panting, her knees weak, sweat dripping down her face. "Hey, you've exhausted me!" A chilling voice immediately echoed into Mrs. Phan's ears. "In Mrs. Lai's garden." "Hurry!" Mrs. Phan suddenly got goosebumps. She opened her eyes wide and saw a young woman in a faded white floral dress. She asked, "Who are you? Why are you in the garden and not in the house? Who's in labor out here?" It was then that Mrs. Phan looked around and realized that the other side was indeed Mrs. Lai's garden. She had been there many times to ask for betel leaves for new mothers. Mrs. Phan realized with a start that she had followed the girl across a narrow path in the field to get here, not through Mrs. Lai's main gate. She began to feel uneasy, but before she could react, the girl's voice chimed again. "Auntie, let's go." Mrs. Phan suddenly remembered that the daughter-in-law of this house had just been announced dead this morning. Her feet trembled. She dared not move any further. But the girl's voice repeated many times, "Mrs. Phan, please come with me, Mrs. Phan." Despite her rising suspicion, Mrs. Phan tried to steady herself and asked, "Who are you? And who am I delivering for? For me and for my child." As soon as she finished speaking, the girl instantly glided forward, standing opposite Mrs. Phan, with a pale face that terrified her, as if her heart would leap out of her chest. Mrs. Phan recognized her. It was Grace. Mrs. Phan fell backward onto the ground, utterly terrified. "Grace, you're dead. How... oh, how can this be?" Grace still stood there, looking at Mrs. Phan with pleading eyes, her pale lips barely moving. "Auntie, save my child! Save my child!" Mrs. Phan's face turned ashen. All color drained. Her whole body trembled, not knowing if it was from fear or cold, and she couldn't lift her feet. She remained seated on the ground, stammering, "Grace, you died? How? Mrs. Phan, hurry!" Grace didn't answer Mrs. Phan. As soon as she finished speaking, she immediately darted towards the dark garden. But her voice still echoed clearly and sorrowfully in Mrs. Phan's ears. For the first time in her life, Mrs. Phan encountered such a scene, and she was utterly terrified. It took all her effort to struggle to her feet, intending to rush back home. But after only a few steps, she suddenly stopped. She remembered Grace's eyes earlier. Though a ghost, she wasn't frightening, but rather held a touch of something deeply pitiable. Grace was a gentle, enduring girl, as Mrs. Phan well knew. Mrs. Phan let out a long sigh, pushing her fear deep into her heart, and decided to turn back to see what was truly happening. The path leading into the garden was difficult, soft and slippery, but Mrs. Phan bravely walked on, her fabric bag of tools still slung over her shoulder. Slowly, she made her way deeper and saw Grace's vague silhouette hovering by a small mound of earth next to a betel-nut tree. Mrs. Phan tried to focus her thoughts so as not to be overwhelmed by fear. Grace reached out her hand to Mrs. Phan and said, "Auntie, here." Mrs. Phan didn't think much more, deciding to take the risk since she had already committed herself. Grace pointed down at the mound of earth, her voice shrill. "Auntie, my child is down there." Mrs. Phan, though still somewhat afraid, had come this far and was compelled to act. She nodded vigorously, then knelt beside the mound of earth. Mrs. Phan heard a faint sound emanating from it, and she was startled, jumping up. But Grace quickly glided to her side and sharply said, "Auntie, dig up the earth." "Auntie? Huh? Dig up the earth? Is it a grave? Hurry, Auntie." Mrs. Phan didn't understand, but seeing Grace's insistent attitude, she became distraught. Temporarily, she knelt down and used her bare hands to dig the earth. After only a thin layer of soil, she uncovered a tiny pale white arm. Mrs. Phan was utterly terrified, quickly recoiling. She let out a sharp gasp, then heard Grace's voice echoing right next to her ear. "Don't be afraid, Auntie. Keep digging. They just hastily buried my child down there. They didn't give him a proper burial. Hurry, Auntie." Mrs. Phan, though still gripped by horror, slowly calmed her emotion. She trembled as she asked Grace, momentarily forgetting that she was a ghost, pushing away her initial fear of her. "Grace, what are you asking me to dig for? What child?" Mrs. Phan probably now vaguely understood the situation. She knelt down again and continued to dig with her hands. Grace's body was revealed, her belly swollen, but it was moving, as if something was stirring inside. Mrs. Phan knew then, for sure, that the child inside Grace's womb was still alive. Immediately, she dropped the fabric bag from her back, took out a small kitchen knife, and without a moment's hesitation, made a long incision across Grace's abdomen. A chilling breeze rustled through the leaves overhead in the dark night. The space was enveloped in a faint darkness. Mrs. Phan held a baby boy in her arms, his umbilical cord still attached. He wasn't crying, but lay silently as if asleep. Yet his tiny chest gently rose and fell with each breath. Mrs. Phan gently patted his bottom to make him cry, and a loud wail echoed through the entire garden. Mrs. Phan also wept, for she held a tiny life in her arms. Her own hands were wresting it from death. Grace looked at her child, but perhaps a ghost who had only recently shed her mortal form could not cry. Her eyes simply held something like joy. Then she looked at Mrs. Phan and said, "Thank you, Auntie. Thank you for saving my child. Please take care of him for a while. I will deal with the rest myself." And so, that night, Mrs. Phan reburied Grace's grave as it was and carried the child, wrapped hastily in a palm leaf cape, running quickly along the muddy path. She knew the reason for Grace's death, but couldn't speak of it. She ran and cried, deeply moved by the sacred power of a mother's love. Until dawn, Mrs. Phan stood before her own house. Mrs. Lai was half asleep when she suddenly heard the faint crying of a baby echoing somewhere nearby. She started, sat up, and stumbled out, seeing Alex still drinking alone. She walked over, sat beside her son, and looked tiredly out the door, then whispered, "Do you hear anything?" "It's the middle of the night. Why aren't you sleeping?" "Hear what, Mother?" "It's night time. I hear a baby crying, like it's coming from the garden." "Is it little Too's child next door? This child is so strange." "No. I hear it like it's from the garden." "Or is it Grace?" "She's dead, Mother." "What are you talking about?" "What? Your mother buried her with her own hands. Even my grandson. I did that for whom? Wasn't it because you wanted to abandon her for Rose, and she got another woman pregnant? If I hadn't done that, do you think you could have married Rose? I meant to make her miscarry, so she wouldn't have a reason to stay in this house. Who knew she'd die? I was afraid of being exposed, so I covered it up. It's all your fault for not listening when I told you not to marry her, and then insisting only to abandon her for another. Now you're here drinking, feeling guilty?" Mrs. Lai's voice was sharp, but Alex didn't answer. Perhaps she was right. Although he no longer loved Grace, even hated her for being the reason he couldn't be with Rose. He didn't want to force Grace to die. He was afraid of facing a lifetime of karmic retribution. He continued to drink, ignoring Mrs. Lai until she finally gave up, angrily leaving the room. But once a person's heart changes, a little bit of guilt doesn't last long. Just 1 month later, Alex returned to his normal state, bringing Rose home. He even seemed extremely happy, completely forgetting that he had driven his wife to her death. At Mrs. Phan's house, people suddenly noticed an additional child crying all day. When asked, Mrs. Phan just smiled and said it was a foundling. She didn't want to explain anything further. And indeed, the child grew up strong and healthy. That night, Mrs. Phan brought the child home. She had thought it was dead because she saw many traces of abortifacient herbs, coupled with being suffocated for too long in the mother's womb. Mrs. Phan hastily gave it first aid, and perhaps the child's vitality was fortunate, or the mother's spirit protected it, allowing it to be safe and become a mother. She was overjoyed, holding the child constantly, cuddling and doting on it, to the point that Ben even became jealous and jokingly told Amy that he was being ignored. The family named the child Hoai Bao. Amy didn't press Mrs. Phan for details about where and how she found him, because for her, having a child was an immense happiness. The neighbors saw Alex bringing Rose home, her belly visibly swelling, and they also suspected something. But they didn't dare ask, only speculating in various ways. Alex ignored it because he had essentially accepted the rumors before deciding to bring Rose here shortly after Grace's death. Rose initially seemed obedient and polite, but after a while, she became lazy and arrogant. That was her true nature. Mrs. Lai sat on the wooden daybed, looking in exasperation at her son meticulously building a cradle for the baby. She sharply announced, "You figure out what you're doing." For a whole month now, this old woman has had to cook and serve your wife. I don't know if she's my daughter-in-law or I'm hers, but she's pregnant, Mother. Treat it as for your grandchild. She's only 4 months along, but she acts like she's about to give birth. I have eyes and ears, Mother. Have you ever seen anyone like her? Grace, back then. Lai suddenly fell silent, realizing she had spoken out of turn. Alex also understood her meaning, but he was more afraid of Rose than of a tiger. He didn't dare say anything to her. Mrs. Lai sat, sighing, thinking about karma, but she didn't want to believe it, for she had always been autocratic and believed herself to always be right. Rose now woke up and came out. She yawned as she walked, looking at her mother-in-law with her slightly nasal voice. "Did you finish breakfast, Mother?" Mrs. Lai was accustomed to this habit. At first she was annoyed, but then thought, "Oh well, it's for my grandchild. It won't be too late after Rose gives birth," she slowly said. "It's all done. Why don't you come down and eat yourself? We've all finished eating. If we waited for you, we'd starve to death." "You're a woman, but you're still sleeping at this hour, not even ready for the market." Rose didn't care. She replied indifferently, "Your grandchild wanted to sleep, not me." After saying that, Rose went downstairs to the kitchen. Mrs. Lai watched her, sighing. "It's as if I've never given birth to you before, always wanting to sleep and still acting like there are leftovers." Alex is probably tired of it too. Alex now stretched out his hand and interjected, "That's enough, Mother. Just let her be. You can say whatever you want, but tomorrow I'll be in the fields for a few days. Remember to take care of my wife and child. If she craves anything, cook it for her." Mrs. Lai shot him a glance and drew out her words. "You're going to the fields, only a few steps from the house. Yet you talk as if you're going to stay in the district town. And you're giving me instructions? This house now belongs to me, so I have to serve her. I wouldn't dare displease her." Alex knew Mrs. Lai was deliberately being sarcastic, so he kept silent. Because if he upset Rose, she would throw a tantrum, screaming and pouting, which was very annoying. He didn't know why Alex had become so weak and timid. In the past, he was so fierce towards Grace, constantly oppressing and scolding her whenever anything wasn't to his liking. This season, the rice fields were ready for harvest. Although Alex's family was well off, he still had to personally oversee the work with the laborers, because Mrs. Lee didn't trust anyone. He lay in the hut, listening to the radio to fight off the impending sleep. Suddenly, he heard someone's voice echoing from outside the bamboo fence. "Oh, it's so cold, so cold." Alex now sat up abruptly. He slightly raised an eyebrow, looking outside. At this hour, only darkness enveloped the tall coconut trees. Alex shrugged and lay back down, assuming he had misheard something on the radio, so he didn't bother with it anymore. After a while, he heard something stirring again, and the trembling voice reappeared. So cold, so painful. It was accompanied by a long, cold wail. Alex began to feel a little panicked. He sat up, straining his neck to look out. He saw the shadow of a woman in a faded white floral dress hovering and swaying by the desolate grave mound right next to the hut. His mouth went rigid. He could only stammer, Who's that?" The crescent moon from above shone down just then, and the woman turned her face to look at Alex, smiling. Her pale face, with cracked, purplish lips that still had traces of blood, and deep, dark, empty eyes, terrified Alex to his core. He fell backward, landing wetly on the ground, gasping for breath. The woman now slowly glided closer to Alex, her appearance utterly ghostly, causing him to tremble with fear. Until someone called him awake, he came back to his senses. "Alex, what's wrong with you? Are you all right?" Mark, a young laborer working for Mrs. Ly's family, heard the noise nearby and quickly ran over, seeing Alex sitting on the ground, his face pale green. Alex stammered, looking at the young man, and replied, I saw a ghost." Mark looked at Alex and forced a laugh. "You're still pulling my leg, aren't you? You don't take me seriously working out here in the fields. Always trying to scare me. You're not going to make me believe you." Mark didn't believe him. He thought Alex was just trying to scare him or tease him, because he had never heard anyone talk about ghosts before, and he himself had never encountered one. Mark forced a smile and clapped Alex on the shoulder. "All right, you sleep. I'm going back to the hut." But Alex grabbed Mark's arm. "No, you sleep here with me. I can't. I have my wife back in the hut. I can't leave her alone. I'm going back. You sleep well." As soon as he finished speaking, Mark turned and left, leaving Alex alone, still trembling with an undefined fear. He thought of running home, but the field road at this hour was deserted, not a soul in sight. The dark night only echoed with the whistling wind, rustling the coconut leaves overhead, a melancholic scene, further adding to the terror in his heart, a vague yet distinctly present entity. Alex went back into the hut, deliberately turning up the radio volume to drown out all the sounds he might hear from outside. He curled up on the old mat, pulling the blanket over his entire body, then closed his eyes, silent, not daring to breathe heavily or make any other movement. He remembered the face of the woman he had just seen. He thought to himself, could it be her? Has she returned? Alex lay like that until the sky began to lighten. The distant voices of some laborers echoed outside the field hut. One noon, Alex felt relieved and finally slept. He slept until noon, waking up late because he was the boss. No one dared to call him or voice an opinion. Secondly, Alex temporarily forgot about the incident because a day of hard work had left him exhausted. He lay back down on the old mat in the hut, quickly falling into a peaceful sleep. Until middle of the night, he was startled awake by a sudden, chilling cold. He realized that a few drops of water, from who knew where, were dripping onto his face. He sat up abruptly, wiping his hand across his face and stared intensely in the dim, insufficient light of the oil lamp. He was horrified to see his fingertips stained with a fresh red, gooey, fishy-smelling liquid. Before Alex could figure out what it was, a piercing laugh suddenly echoed, an echoing, resentful female voice, now far, now near. Alex immediately realized that the liquid dripping onto his face was blood. His consciousness began to tremble. The emotions of extreme fear weighed heavily, as if wanting to burst from his chest. Slowly, he looked up at the ceiling of the hut. A pale white face with two jet black eyes and a twisted, eerie smile of the woman terrified Alex to the point where his mouth hung agape. But he couldn't scream. He was temporarily mute from terror. And Alex recognized that woman. It was Grace. Grace was hanging from the ceiling of the hut. From her mouth, fresh red blood dripped onto the ground. She looked at Alex with sorrowful eyes, then suddenly burst into a wailing cry, her voice echoing mournfully in the dark space, piercing his eardrums as if wanting to split his brain. Grace's voice was like an echo from the netherworld. "Alex, my love, my love." Alex was almost paralyzed. His human functions ceased, leaving only me. "No. No, it's not me." Grace suddenly stopped crying and burst into a cackling, ghoulish laugh, her voice shrill and echoing in the silent night. "It's you!" Then, suddenly, Grace immediately swooped down, her pale white face staring intently at her former husband. Her deep black eyes seemed to spin, wanting to bore into the heart of the man who knew no loyalty, no pity for his child, and no common decency. Alex was now at the peak of his fear. He couldn't utter a single word to justify his sins. Alex cried, but not out of remorse, but out of sheer terror. He collapsed onto the ground, then began to flail, not knowing what to do. Until the next morning, people discovered him and went into the house to call Mrs. Lai. She summoned a doctor to examine him, and he reported that Alex had suffered a severe shock, causing cardiac arrest, and had fallen into a coma. Whether he would recover depended on his fate. Mrs. Lee sat sadly beside her son. "So," she let out a sigh and muttered to herself, "I wonder what he encountered to become like this. What was it? Could it be he saw a ghost?" Rose now walked over, frowned, and interjected, "My wife is about to give birth, and he's in this state. How can we live? How can we live? He doesn't know." Mrs. Lee immediately turned and glared at Rose, then retorted, "Can't you see he's talking nonsense? How can you still say that? Do you love your husband? Of course I do. But now that he's like this and I'm about to give birth, how will I manage? You still have me. I'm not dead yet. Is this family not capable enough to take care of you during childbirth that you have to worry? Go take care of your husband." Rose obediently uttered a yes under her breath, as if just to comply, without any sincerity. She didn't know what kind of feelings she had for Alex, and whether coming here to live with him was simply out of love, or if there were other motives. From that day on, after Mrs. Lai finished giving Alex a bowl of bland porridge to sustain him, She felt a little stuffy inside and went out to the porch to get some fresh air. The night was truly quiet, the gentle breeze carrying the faint, sweet scent of jasmine bushes growing around the front yard. In the dark, Mrs. Lee saw a shadowy figure standing faintly behind the dwarf bamboo pot. It seemed like a woman, with long hair fluttering in the night wind. Mrs. Lee raised her hand to rub her eyes several times, afraid she was seeing things, but clearly the person was sitting there, holding a chopping knife and continuously chopping something on a wooden board. Mrs. Lee began to tremble. Her unsteady steps slowly moved closer, not daring to make a sound. The woman continued chopping for a while, then suddenly stopped. She slowly turned her head to look at Mrs. Pat. Lie. Her face twisted and drooping. Then she spoke in a chilling voice. Mother, I've come back from gathering duckweed. Let me chop it for the pigs to eat. Okay? Mrs. Lie's eyes widened in horror when she realized that this was Grace. She stood rooted to the spot, paralyzed by extreme fear, her senses seemingly shutting down, except for the fear itself. She stammered, unable to form a complete sentence. Grace! Is that you, Grace? Grace, with her pale face, smiled faintly. It's me, Mother. Aren't you happy to see me? Mrs. Lie instinctively recoiled a few steps. Sweat poured down her face. She couldn't breathe. She now spoke in gasps. No. No, it can't be. Grace was still sitting with her back to Mrs. Lie, but her head was completely turned backward. Her jet black eyes stared up at Mrs. Lee, a smile still on her face, devoid of emotion. Grace then whispered, Mother, you hate me so much, don't you? Why, Mother, why did you kill me? Mrs. Lee shook her head frantically, her thoughts swirling, as if wanting to burst from her chest. No, it's not true. Grace suddenly appeared directly in front of Mrs. Lie. She screamed, her mouth still spewing words of intense hatred. Didn't you tell me to listen? Mrs. Lie, overwhelmed by fear, fainted and collapsed onto the cold floor, completely unconscious. A few days later, Mrs. Lee gradually regained her composure and quietly went to the altar room to light incense for Alex. But there was no photo of Grace there, even though she was still the official daughter-in-law of the house when she died. Mrs. Lee stood silently for a long time, lost in thought, then let out a soft sigh. She went to the kitchen, feeling hungry. But as she entered the kitchen door, she saw a shadowy figure standing with its back to her by the roaring wood-burning stove. It was another woman with long jet-black hair and the familiar faded white floral dress. Mother, I'm cooking pig's trotter soup for you to eat. Mrs. Lee was utterly terrified, falling sideways against the wall. Her whole body trembled, unable to speak. She quickly ran upstairs. She didn't dare stay in the house and went to her neighbor, Mrs. Tu, using the excuse of visiting little T. Mrs. Tu, unaware of anything, smiled cheerfully at her. It's been so long since I've seen you, Mrs. Lee, coming to my house. We live right next door, but I never see you visit. Oh, there's just been too much trouble at home. Mrs. Dart chuckled, saying she didn't mean to pry or be sarcastic. She simply offered Mrs. Lee water, and then continued with polite conversation. Mrs. Lee, however, had no heart for small talk, and gave brief answers. When it got late, and she couldn't stay any longer, she stood up and asked to leave. Mrs. Tu, holding little T, watched Mrs. Lies retreating back, disappear, then softly said to herself, "She's so strange today, always talking about trouble at home. Why did she suddenly come here and sit all afternoon?" Mrs. Lai returned home, but still didn't dare go down to the kitchen, even though her stomach was now completely empty. She poured herself some tea to keep herself going, then went to light incense at the altar for her husband and Alex. "Come, bless and protect me, because if things continue like this, I'll have to leave this house so as not to haunt the two of you." After lighting the incense, she returned to sit by the front door, not knowing what else to do. She kept remembering the horrifying face until she was too tired and her eyes drooped. Then she stood up and went into her room to sleep. She even carefully brought the Buddha statue with her, placing it above her head for peace of mind before falling into a deep sleep. But in the middle of the night, Mrs. Lai was awakened by a soft, mournful cry echoing from somewhere nearby, right next to her ear, yet also far away. Before Mrs. Li could even sit up, a tangled mass of black hair suddenly fell from the ceiling, brushing back and forth over her face. She jumped, letting out a sharp gasp. Before she could put her feet on the bed and run out, Grace's ghostly face appeared right next to hers, looking at her with eyes that were entirely black. "Mother, where did you go?" "Let me fan you to sleep, Mother." Mrs. Li gasped, her breath coming in short, rapid gasps, unable to speak. Grace suddenly changed her demeanor. Her pale lips twisted to one side, and she burst into a sobbing wail. "Why did you kill me, Mother? Why didn't you love your grandchild, Mother? Why were you so cruel, Mother?" Grace's sobbing plea, repeated again and again in the dark room, lit only by the flickering flame of a tiny oil lamp like a bean. And in that faint light, a shadow of Mrs. Lai was cast, being held by a bony hand that grabbed her hair and repeatedly slammed her head. The continuous impacts created a dull, thudding sound in the silent, dark night, echoing the scene from months ago, the scene where Mrs. Lai herself had slammed her daughter-in-law's head while her own grandchild was still in Grace's womb. Karmic retribution. No matter where one runs, one cannot escape the net of heaven. Mrs. Lai's house returned to silence as if nothing had ever happened. All enmity and hatred were buried, as no one truly knew the full story. Only Mrs. Phan understood, but she decided to remain silent until the very end. For she also believed in the law of karma, that in life, whoever causes trouble will bear the consequences. That was the price to pay, and there was no escaping it. Mrs. Phan sat, watching Hoai Bao, sleeping peacefully in his cradle. She let out a long sigh, then gazed out at the riverbank, where the water flowed calmly and quietly. She hoped that his life would also be peaceful like that, and no matter how many ups and downs he faced, he would always maintain a kind heart. Anyhow, bố, es trajo